Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this, the Cumnock Hour, stroke Genesis Conversations. Every Friday in the Cumnock Trice, we co-host an event like this, a literary event usually, with our sister festival, the Boswell Book Festival, and they are well represented this afternoon, as you're about to find out. But we have another partner in today's special event, and that's the Genesis Foundation, and they've invited us at the Trice to present the Scottish leg of their nationwide Genesis conversations that have been taking place all over the United Kingdom. In a moment, I'll pass over to our chairman, Iain Macwhirter, but I just want to thank the Genesis Foundation for their continued support and collaboration, and especially in adding this additional thread, which is a discursive forum to inspire new thoughts about art and culture's importance in 21st century Scotland. And I'd like to thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. And I want to encourage you all to contribute with questions later. As the conversation gets going, there'll be plenty of time for some very much wider discussion. So, to introduce our distinguished panel, ladies and gentlemen, our chairman, Iain Macwhirter.
Sir James. I'd just like to say that I had one of the most extraordinary and uplifting music experiences in my life yesterday, hearing compositions written by pupils at the Robert Burns Academy just up the road, and played by local musicians as well. Extremely profound and moving pieces of work, which you would never normally have expected to be produced by these young people, and it really made me examine my own prejudices about the nature of culture and its origins in the community. Because normally you'd expect that they, not having any formal musical training, would be influenced by pop music, by folk music, and that the pieces of music would be fairly repetitive and fairly simple. I found they were extraordinarily sophisticated pieces of modern classical music, and I was most intrigued to discover how this happened. And it, as I said, it made me address my prejudices and also made me wonder about the state of education in Scotland. As you may well know, Scottish education has been in a bit of a downward spiral recently, and I think that is part of the problem. There's a lack of ambition, a lack of application, and a lack of expectation for young people. I mean, one of the most moving things is called the music of land reclamation. And these young people had been invited to compose music to go along with these abstract pictures taken from above of areas of Ayrshire, which had been land reclamation, as I said. And hearing them talk about it was quite inspiring, because they knew what they were doing, and they were able to explain it and discuss it much more articulately than you would have expected, or I would have expected. Now, I don't know where else this happens. I don't think this happens probably in any other school across Scotland. I understand, and we'll discuss this later, that music education is in a bit of a crisis in Scotland because of precisely this lack of ambition, this lack of expectation on pupils that they can reach for the heights. So in this conversation, we're going to discuss community confidence, creativity, and cultural regeneration, and how the Cumnock Tryst has sought to liberate the creative energies of people in supposedly depressed areas like Ayrshire. Though I must say, walking around Cumnock the other day in the sunshine, it didn't seem all that depressed. But there are obvious challenges for education in rural areas. One of the main ones to me just seems to be that because people don't speak the abstract and abstruse language of culture, it doesn't mean that they're unable to appreciate it, or more importantly, to create it. And that was demonstrated in an extraordinary way yesterday in the music of land reclamation. It's a wonderful title, by the way. It just reminds me of albums by Brian Eno, if anyone here is old enough to remember Roxy music. But this was not pop culture. It wasn't as I expected, a rather pedestrian or folk-influenced music. I mean, this was the most extraordinarily advanced, I think, is the way to describe it, modern classical music of the highest possible quality. So, anyway, what is the role of arts in rural regeneration? Let me just introduce our distinguished panel of folk who know a thing or two about all of that in Scotland and elsewhere. Now, on my far left is Gillian Walker, a composer who helped create that extraordinary work, Music for Land Reclamation. She's a Scottish composer focused on collaborative and social art, a workshop leader for organisations such as the Cumnock Tryst, Drake Music Scotland, and the London Sinfonietta. Gillian has composed works for many orchestras, including the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra and the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. She received her Masters with distinction from the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in 2023, supported by the Dewar Arts Award and other scholarships, and we'll be discussing that later as well. Next to her, Alistair Moffat, a prolific Scottish historian and author. Alice has written over 30 books on Scottish history. I think you've got another one coming out tomorrow, is that right?
Yesterday.
Yes.
Another one tomorrow.
Well, we'd like to be up to date. What is it called?
Edinburgh.
Edinburgh.
A new history.
Edinburgh. And who's it by? I mean, who's published? So people can go and buy it.
I wrote it.
You wrote it.
Come on, no, it's the 900th anniversary of the founding of the city. That's the idea.
Anyway, I was the former director of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe and a former director of programmes for Scottish television. He founded the Borders Book Festival in 2004. He was a former rector of the University of St Andrews. Andrew Hagan, on my left, is one of Britain's greatest living novelists and essayists. His works like my favourite, which is Our Fathers, have earned Booker Prize and Whitbread nominations. Personality won the 2003 James Tate Black Memorial Prize, and Calling Bible John received a BAFTA award. His latest book, The Illuminations, is about an elderly woman in Ayrshire losing her memories while her soldier grandson tries to forget his experiences in Afghanistan, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. James Knox is director of the Fleming-Wyfold Art Foundation, which is dedicated to promoting Scottish art. 10 years ago, he launched the campaign to save Dumfries House, advocating for cultural regeneration in East Ayrshire, of which the Cumnock Tryst is a notable expression. He also founded the Boswell Book Festival, where a lot of book festival people are here, which is focused on biography, and he's authored works on cultural icons, including Robert Byron, is that right?
Yes, the 20th century Robert Byron, who was a cutting-edge travel writer and
right.
architectural campaigner.
Okay. Next to him, John McAslan. He's a multi-award-winning architect and the executive chair of John McAslan and Partners. He's received over 200 design awards, including 30 REBA awards. In fact, you went through all of his awards. It would take all afternoon to read them out. Grand designs, indeed. He's also the honorary consul to Haiti, I think. Is that right? He's still the honorary consul to Haiti.
Was. Briefly.
No jokes about cats. He was appointed CBE in 2012. He supports architectural education through various bursaries and leads philanthropic initiatives such as the restoration of Dunoon Borough Hall. He also created the Dunoon Film Festival and runs an award-winning film company called Wee Cock Sparrow. DreamWorks, eat your heart out. Finally, Thursa Sanderson is Chief Executive of Drake Music Scotland since 2002. She champions music making for disabled musical people. She spearheaded the disabled artist-led initiative Create and the youth-focused Learn. In 2016, she was awarded an OBE for her contribution to music education and disability inclusion. And you were involved in this morning's concert. Can you tell us how that went?
Yes, it was wonderful. Gillian was playing, and the musicians from the Hebrides Ensemble, led by Will Conway on cello, alongside musicians from Hillside School, which is an additional support needs school here in Cumnock. And we've been partnering with Cumnock Trust more or less since its inception, performing work
Well,
using the ideas, built around the ideas.
Well, let me pause there, because what we want to do, how we want to structure this, we want to give each member of the panel opportunity just to state a position or make some observation or make a contribution, very brief, a minute or 2 minutes. Then we'll have a discussion amongst the panel about the issues raised, and after that we'll move out to the audience, which is the most important part of an event like this. We'll have roving mics for you to make your contribution. So Thursa, sorry, I interrupted you in full flow, but what would you like to say about it?
Well, I just would like to say I think James has done a remarkable thing from the outset, looking at the young people with additional support needs, as well as young people in the normal mainstream schools here, as potential creators who have their own voices, who have their own perceptions of the world and experiences, and sort of embraced that as part of the musical offering that is made here at the Cumnock Trust. And I think it says a lot about a community, and it says a lot about a society when you see how they do treat the most vulnerable people in that society, how people with disabilities, people who have vulnerabilities of all different kinds, are how their needs are met, but also how they are included. And I think that again, it creates a kind of wealth for the whole of the community, to feel that you are part of something that recognises and values all the constituent parts of that community.
John?
Thank you. Well, look, I'm really particularly happy when I am what I call making projects. That's really what I'm interested in most. And in terms of the issue of cultural regeneration in rural communities, I just wanted, there's a couple of projects I just want to mention before doing. The first was in Bexhill-on-Sea, which was a Dillawar Pavilion built in the 30s, and the second was a roundhouse in Chalk Farm, and then the Dunborough Hall. And in both those cases, the first two, it came clear to me that for projects to work, in my mind, you really need three things. You need, particularly if it's an existing building, it doesn't matter how ruinous that building is, there needs to be an artifact, which is the building. Maybe sometimes these are new, but if you've got a historic building like the Dillawar or Roundhouse, even if it's repurposing, that's the starting off point. Then you need a local constituency of people who are committed to retaining, saving that building and doing something with it, particularly cultural interest. And the third is you need people who are going to champion it, who will make the project happen and who have the ambition to do that. And you might think, well, where's the money? Well, I always think, it's not my idea, it came from our client on the Roundhouse, Torquil Norman, said, I said, Torquil, where's the money going to come from? He said, well, money always follows a good idea. And I agree with him, and I think, and that's what we have used really throughout sometimes we've succeeded, sometimes we've failed. And in Dunoon, that really was the case, because the building became available. My mother said, you've done the Roundhouse, you need to sort this out. Very, very demanding lady. And so my wife and I bought it for £1. As my daughter said, it's the most expensive pound that we'd ever spent. Rip-off, I think she said. And then we set about raising funds. And the reason that we became involved was exactly those three reasons. When I visited the building in 2008, there was a local group who were committed to saving the building. A small group, but a very committed group. The building itself was wonderful, albeit ruinous, and that I felt that within that group, and perhaps with our support and others, there would be the ambition to make the project happen. And indeed, money eventually did come along. We used a lot of meanwhile uses and pop-up events and everything else. We managed to get artist room support. We had a Robert Mapplethorpe exhibition before the building was occupiable, really. And we set the bar high, as high as we could, for it to be what we call the Contemporary Centre for Art, CCA. And since the project opened in 2017, which was, a 10-year battle to get funding, for which we raised all the funds, the 3.5 million needed. I think it has been a great success, and crucially, through COVID, it operated whilst a lot of venues closed. And Jenny Hunter, who runs the gallery, I said, Jenny, did you ever, what happened during COVID? Are we going to keep it open? Oh yeah, she kept it open, and it became a community space during COVID. And since then, particularly in the last year with the 150th anniversary, the momentum's built and built and built. And so I think it's got that level of sustainability now through becoming not the only, but one of the key cultural hearts in the town, and perhaps the most significant one. It's got a magnificent group of small team of volunteers, and it's gained that sort of momentum. So these projects take a long, long time and need a lot of energy and local support. But I'm a great believer in the power of community engagement and of making things happen. And there's great evidence here, particularly with the Cumnock Tryst and the Boswell Festival and elsewhere, of projects like Dunbar Hall and like these projects, how important they are to not just rejuvenate local communities, but also engage all generations and make culture accessible to all. Thank you.
James.
Well, I think I loved your remark about, I defer to John in absolutely everything, but when you said money follows a good idea, the really interesting thing about the campaign to save Dumfries House is actually there was absolutely no interest or any money at all following the brilliant idea that we should save it. And when I launched the campaign in 2005, it largely fell on deaf ears. I was lobbying politicians. I was coming up with reports saying we should have a mining museum on the estate. And so it went on. And then when actually the house was officially put on the market along with the estate, by that time I'd doubled my firepower by linking up with Marcus Binning of Save Britain's Heritage. It was still an absolute losing battle against, I can only call them the great and the good, of the largely Edinburgh-based political and cultural establishment who did not want to save Dumfries House because they all had their own commercial interests at heart. And they would not listen to the importance for regeneration, or they did not care about actually the central belt and the southwest of Scotland and the forgotten mining communities and old industrial communities to a shocking degree. And it was fortunate that when I happened to be making rather an angry and impassioned speech in Edinburgh to all the great and the good who sat there impassively, in the audience was the Prince of Wales. And he, of course, had the power, the empathy to realize at once how this would transform the lives of people. And one thing led to another, and there was a further meeting at Clarence House, and then there was a terrible nail-biting moment when all sorts of things were going on in top secret. And lo and behold, of course, when the Prince got involved, all the great and the good of Edinburgh thought, oh, this is a tremendously good idea. Well, our money will follow this idea. And so, thanks to him, it was saved. And I think what it showed was, it showed that actually, it illustrated that deprivation and low self-esteem go together. And if you have high expectations, high aspirations, great art, great architecture, great ideas, then everybody's self-esteem, both as individuals and as communities and as nations, lifts. And that's what Dumfries House has achieved, and along with a lot of other things. And interestingly, on the back of Dumfries House, my wife Caroline had the idea to found the Boswell Book Festival, which then we have also enveloped in our own regeneration trust called the Boswell Trust, which is focused on Auchinleck, and in particular on the project to restore Boswell's mausoleum, along with his reputation and fame in Auchinleck, where we've actually commissioned the most beautiful monumental bronze feather writing quill as a work of art, as the first monument to Boswell anywhere in the world. And so that regeneration goes on. And then finally, I would say, with my day job running the Fleming collection, We must look at ways of conquering the threshold problem of not being able to get people over the threshold into art galleries. And you do that by taking the art out of the art galleries, which currently I'm doing in Stirling with the climate change show of Scottish artists in the Pathwood building, which is in the big student hall, 1968 Grade A listed, very good early modernist building, strong with approved, and it's just thronged with students all the time. They might or might not be looking at the art, but there they are. And I did it again last year in Coventry Cathedral. So you need to find, and so later I hope we'll talk about how can we do this locally to get people art outside in these rural communities here.
And you must never take no for an answer.
You're so right, yes.
No is halfway to a yes.
Yes.
I mean, no, it doesn't mean anything.
And also, the other thing that I got the private mobile number of the head of the Heritage Lottery Fund, and I knew she was coming up to Ayrshire because her father had been a minister in Ayr, and I knew she was going to take some leery look at Dumfries house. And I said to Caroline, can I ring this mobile? And she said, you've got nothing to lose. And that's the other great motto. And she did listen. She was quite annoyed.
It was 3 in the morning.
No, actually she was rushing to catch a plane, so it was really annoying. But actually, you're right. Don't take no, and you've got nothing to lose.
Well, fascinating. Andrew.
James mentioned a crucial word just then for me, which is localism. For many years, I think it was expected, both at a government level, but also in what used to pass for common sense, that culture came from big cities, it came from other places, it came from not the place where you lived. I grew up further up the coast in Ayrshire and Kilwinning, and the notion that I grew up alongside was that if you wanted culture, go to London, go to Glasgow, go to Edinburgh, but don't expect too much of it around the school that you go to, or around the housing estate where you grew up. I grew up.
It's not for us.
It's not for us, and they wouldn't have it, and it's essentially something that you can't address. I've watched through my adult life many, many bold and brilliant attempts, this being chief, this that's happening here in Cumnock, Tries, being chief of a refusal of that phony wisdom. The notion that people who come from here, who come from rural places, are somehow excluded from the great sort of firing of the artistic engines, that must be something that is instigated elsewhere, at the great schools, in the great universities. Well, I have been delighted to see the extent to which that notion has not only been diluted, but is being utterly decimated by the wealth of effort and talent and creativity happening at the local level. What a change that is. I remember being, maybe 12 years old and very much loving poetry, loving novels, going to the local school, St Michael's Academy in Kilwinning, a school that my 3 elder brothers had slightly disgraced the family at, and I had to keep up that reputation as well. But we lived in a house without books. My father, of course, objected once. I said that in Radio 4 once, that I grew up in a house without books, and my father phoned me the next day and said, "You told a lie on Radio 4. I said, "I'd never lie, especially on Radio 4. He said, "No, you did. You said there were no books in our house. You were growing up." There was one. It was green. It was sitting on top of the fridge for ages. I said, "Dad, that was the Cumnock telephone directory." Anyway, the school library became the great opener, the great sort of tunnel to the enchanted kingdom. And I have to tell you that the challenges, we're celebrating things today in this discussion, I hope, but also we're questioning great difficulties, I hope. And one of them is, for instance, that somebody whose life was quite literally, I'm not introducing a metaphor here, I feel my life was saved by the school library and by the local library in the towns of Kilwinning and Irvine. I read every single book in Kilwinning Library, including all the Zane Greys and Mills and Boone. I've affected my imagination to this day, sadly. But the school librarians would take you in hand. A difficult time in the 1980s, the decimation of many of these communities, especially here. I would never resist an invitation to come here. I remember what happened in these communities in the 80s. And all these years on, let's not forget that, how the heart was ripped out of certain habits and customs of decency, community, and commonality in these places. I'm not about to make a political speech. We are moving on, all of us. But let's move on in a spirit of comprehension of what these communities have been through and what happened to expectation in these places. But today, I'm afraid, there's a huge challenge in North Ayrshire where the provision of librarians and schools is being cut. The proposal is to cut them enormously. These safe spaces where young people who don't grow up in houses necessarily where there are libraries or books or these things called studies. I'm addicted to my study now. I can tell you, I first heard of it when I was about 22. School libraries were the place where you could go to let your mind relax, to feel safe, to feel accompanied in your venture into unknown territory. And unknown territory is what artists and lovers of art are all about. We'll be discovering that this week here at the Cumnock Tries. So I'm looking forward to speaking to my colleagues here about some of these matters, but I just wanted to open up one or two wee personal areas. For a novelist, it's always personal. And for me, there is even more where that came from.
Alistair, I'm glad to hear it. I think confidence is a huge issue in rural areas. As Andrew said, we think that culture happens somewhere else, in Edinburgh, at the festival, in Glasgow and London and so on. And when I left television in 1999 and came down to the borders to return to the borders to live, I felt that lack of confidence really, really keenly. And I was associated with a wee theatre in Melrose, and the guy who ran it said, "Why don't you just take a weekend and do something?" And I said, "Okay, I'll start a book festival," just like that. And so I thought, well, how the hell do we do this? And I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll invite all the most famous writers that I know, that I can think of, because that's about confidence. And so I got Michael Palin to come, I got Iain Rankin to come, I got Germaine Greer, and various other people to come. Sheila Hancock had written a memoir about her life with John Thaw and so on, and Sheila came, and the idea was to say, these famous people will come here, to you. You don't have to go to them, they'll come to you. And it was a disaster, because we put tickets on sale, published a program, and they didn't sell. I thought, what the heck is going on? And my wife said to me one night, you know what? Nobody actually believes that these people are coming. They think it's a con, they think that you're winding them up. And so I ran a piece in the Southern Reporter saying, honest, they are coming, and it took off. And the impact was immediate, because it said, you don't have to go to the cities. In a way, the cities will come to you. And that gives the place confidence. It's the biggest event, cultural event between Newcastle and Edinburgh. It has an economic impact of nearly £4 million. We have a footfall of 45,000, blah, blah, blah. But that's not why we do it. It's not why we do it. We do it because it instills confidence in a rural community. It instills confidence that this place, it's in the borders, but it's not on the border of anything. It's central. For 4 days in June, it's where you need to be. And festivals are great for that point of view, because by their nature, they're ephemeral. If you don't come that weekend, well, you're not going to see it any other way. You can't get it online, it's not on YouTube. You've got to come, you've got to turn up. The live event really matters. And the other thing that we encourage enormously is working with kids. We spend a lot of money, and Bailey Gifford, bless their hearts, used to sponsor that. We give children who go to events a free book. They get a book for nothing. And we encourage them to talk to the authors and get them to sign their book and so on. And one wee lassie came up to me and she said, I don't want anybody to write in my book. No. So, you don't have to, you don't have to. She has. I don't know why people want you to sign their books, but there you are. But that was really important to me, because not only were we creating the next generation of people who would come to festivals, it also helped us to stop depending on big names and to try things out, to do things that were different. And of course we got whacked in the side of the head by COVID, and as I say, we've got this current disaster with Bailey Gifford. But nevertheless, we're planted in the festival and in the borders now. People see it as their thing, they identify with it. they talk to individuals. And so for me, it's about confidence as much as anything.
Excellent. Well, that's a really good moment to move on, because these are all inspiring. I know these are all inspiring tales of cultural entrepreneurship in many cases. But we want to now move on to cultural confidence and localism. And there's no one better to speak to about that than Gillian Walker, who is in charge of the workshop for these extraordinary young people who produce music for land reclamation, which I heard yesterday. Now, it's very difficult without being able to give them a sense of what that music is like, to convey how sophisticated, apart from anything else, I found that these works. I'm not musically trained, but to my ear they did sound like extremely accomplished pieces of modern classical music. Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yes, absolutely. So through some of the sessions that we did with the young people, we're looking at contemporary composers and techniques that would be relevant for them, and to engage with modern music making. I mean, we have James McMillan as part of the Cumnock Festival. How better to learn and to engage with contemporary music and to learn from contemporary living composers.
So how did you get that engagement? Did you expose them to classical works that you thought might inspire them? And
Yeah.
how did they respond to that?
So we showed them a lot of different pieces by living composers, things like Philip Glass, and more recent composers down in London, like Alex Groves, and pop influences as well, like Laurie Anderson, to try and get a mixture of different genres. But always coming back to the elements of music can be simple. It can be broken down into simple building blocks, and from there you can create complex things. And that's where we go into building confidence through engaging with simple materials, and they get that, aha, I can do that, that moment when they're able to pick up very small building blocks and make pieces of music which we recognise as being contemporary classical pieces of work in the concert yesterday.
Yeah, as I indicated earlier, what this remarkable project, how it worked was they were given aerial photographs of areas of land reclamation. Now you may think that's the most boring thing imaginable, but these were quite extraordinary shots taken by Simon Butterworth, who also played an extraordinary bass clarinet in the trio which played the music that was inspired by them. He took these photographs and he compared them to pieces of abstract expressionist art, like Jackson Pollock's, and showed the kind of similarities between the kind of aerial designs, the designs on the ground that he was photographing, and what these artworks were trying to convey as well. And then you invited, it was extraordinary hearing the young women and one man talking about how that inspired them to come up with the music. Now, how did that process work?
So we introduced the students to lots of different photographs taken by Simon. I mean, they're absolutely spectacular, lots of different colours, lines, textures that can really evoke different types of music. So that in itself is like a musical map.
Different emotions.
Different emotions, absolutely. So we did lots of like workshops on, you know, what music sounds sad, happy to you. Very simple things, but quite a complex discussion ensues when you try to nitpick on what it is that makes music like it is. Is it minor, is it major, is it happy, is it sad? What does colour look like in music? That's a hard thing to talk about. You get loads of arguments about it. That's red, that's blue, you know.
And did they come up with musical equivalent for colours?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a way to translate artistic techniques into contemporary composition techniques, and then we built kind of maps and kind of a musical schedule to be able to. The main point of the composition projects is to authentically take the pupil's idea and to translate into their own original musical ideas. So it's all about their music, their outcomes, their it's personalisation and choice, which is a huge thing from Curriculum for Excellence in the schools. So it's all about them and what they want to get out of the music. So
So they got to choose their pictures, which was a huge moment for them. There was, I think, maybe 20, 30, 40 images that we had to distill and pick from, and they identify with some of them. I mean, the most amazing thing happened where some of the students had personal backgrounds to the pictures.
You brought that in.
Yeah, so some of them, their grandparents worked in the open cast coal mines, and they knew about the locations of the pictures, and again, more conversations generated in a real connection to the kind of cultural, historical, landscape of the areas brought into the classroom. But that process is really high-level creative thinking for an advanced higher class, and they were absolutely more than capable of doing that.
And they weren't just, picking out chords on a guitar here or playing chords on a piano. They were actually using digital notation software to transcribe this into actual music, in proper composition on lines and staves.
Yeah, absolutely. So the starting point was using pianos and whatever instruments they were comfortable with, and then going into the music notation software. And that technology is quite vital to get young people to engage with composition, especially if there's a lack of knowledge in musical literacy in the classroom. And that musical notation software is very accessible for those young people to quickly get ideas onto the page and to generate musical concepts that they want to develop through looking at the photographs that they were looking at.
Is this happening widely, do you think, in Scottish schools?
No. No, this is unique. This is absolutely unique. There's the projects that we see here bring high quality music making from what we're talking about, taking instrumentalists and artists from the cities and bringing them to the local area. What these children and young people are engaging with are professional musicians and artists that come in, and they get to share their experiences with them, and in turn they get to learn a little bit about the students and their background and their hopes for the future and their hopes for creativity and what they want to see in their work. And I think that's really special and really unique to these projects.
Andrew, coming from that community, what do you make of that yourself?
I mean, it's just a kind of a miracle, really. It's a miracle. When I was a certain age, I was desperate to meet other writers. I knew I was going to be a writer. I just felt it. I was absolutely kind of alive with the wish to be. And I'd read everything and constantly sort of rehearsing. And I had one of those kids who'd have a typewriter when they were 11 or something. I was always determined. But I had no peer group, and I had no instruction, and I had no mentors. In Ayrshire at that time, it just didn't exist. And I'm talking about the early 80s. I remember going to the Harbour Arts Centre when I was young, and the poet Norman McCabe came. And it was as if, for cooler kids, it was as if sort of, the Sex Pistols had come to town. I sort of remember sitting at the front, sort of with huge eyes, just staring at this impossibly handsome, tall man who looked like Scotland. His face was all peaks and sort of, glens. This amazing bright eye. He had like Robert Burns' famous bright eye. And I don't forget, he just looked across the top of us all and he said the words, "Bullock bellied in a green mud, rolls his brown eyes in a dark delight." I nearly fell off my chair. Opening lines to his famous poem, Lagandone and Harris. And I thought, if I could just speak to this man, he will sort of impart something. And it's this miracle we're talking about. There's nothing more naked and wonderful than the transmission from one human being to another, especially perhaps an experienced human being, not to say a gifted human being, somehow transmitting by a kind of osmosis and a kind of miracle, and also technique and the educational technique, something of the mystery. And he did. I spoke to him afterwards and never forgot the permission that seemed to be given, because as well as these techniques that have been brilliantly described here, there is a hidden thing, and it's called permission. You're being allowed to dream it, allowed to appoint yourself as one of the people who might benefit from it or might have creativity of a sort that could be recognized by other artists. I'll never forget that moment. And unlike many novelists working today, I'm not the product of a creative writing school. I wish I had been. It would have been enormously encouraging, especially when it comes to editing and the business and preparing manuscripts for publication. I had to learn all of that on the hoof. I didn't know writers when I was young, except these one or two experiences, which I've never forgotten. And I bet you that's true of the more committed of the kids who you are coming into contact with.
Yeah, and it's not just the most gifted or the most able who we're talking about here, are we, Thursa? Because you work with disabled.
Yes, that's right. We have a very long-term view of how creativity can develop. For the people that we're working with, we are starting at a very basic level, and the most important thing from our point of view is to sustain input over an extended period of time. So our work in schools goes on year. Our input to artists is sustained over the lifespan. So we have some young people that we knew when they were young people, who started off getting involved in music. And the way that we do it is through technology. It's specialised music technology that enables people with very limited movement, who are maybe non-vocal, who have sensory impairments of all different kinds. And these technologies become their instruments so that they have an equivalent to an acoustic or conventional musical instrument. They can make sound, they just need some way to control that sound. And then once they can control that sound, then they can develop a sense of being a musician. And as things go on, if you're often, your starting point into composing music, Gillian will probably agree with this, is if you play, you start thinking in terms of what you can play, the sound that you can make, how you can combine that with some other player, how you can be part of an ensemble. And all of these things, are key building blocks of a music education. And without all of these things, kind of with a gradual incremental process of development, you can't get to that point of thinking of yourself as a creative artist. There's something about that ability to control and to be the agent of the creative process that brings you to that point of realization, I am an artist. And seeing that, seeing some amazing people emerging as composers, who have profound levels of autism, who are neurodivergent, have physical disabilities, are in wheelchairs. For me, as the head of the organisation that I'm in, I see these things, and they are a continuing revelation. I think I'd just put a word in as well for the people who have their confidence and self-esteem and that sense of autonomy and self-determination developed. You see that flowering through any kind of participation in creative activity, and having it brought out by really, really good artistic leaders, people who work with other people.
Can I ask you what the Trist has, how has it facilitated and promoted and helped you in this kind of work?
The Trist has given us as an organisation confidence as well, I think. We're 20 years into an amazing process of seeing how these things can develop. I think partnerships are very important as well, and we have some other good partnerships with people, and I think partnerships need quite a bit of work, and they don't always work. So working well in partnership, I think, is a very important thing, and that has certainly happened here. But yes, the point about confidence I was just going to make before I forget is that there are a whole lot of benefits to people from being participants in this kind of activity. They need not necessarily go on to become musicians, performers, artists, writers. But there is something that happens inside that then carries you into your life. It may be an appreciation as an audience member, but there's something else that sparks this sense of identity and of being somebody with something to say.
John, cultural confidence. Reflect on that.
Well, I think, look, sometimes it happens very young, sometimes it happens older, when you're slightly older. I mean, I found somebody from the Herald was interviewing me and I said that, you know, I am getting older, but I now feel confident enough to be able to probably do a decent building. And that wasn't me being smug, it was genuine, the fact that suddenly all the bits began to fit together. And you know, one of my great heroes as an architect, Louis Kahn, he was 65 before he really designed his first great building, and he only designed 5 buildings of, you know, those 5 buildings were masterly. Or Gaudi, who was, you know, spent 25 years on the Sagrada Familia, and if he hadn't been run over by a tram, would have continued to design, and Frank Lloyd Wright and Picasso and blah, blah. So I think this thing about longevity, certainly from my point of view, has brought confidence. And I mean, as I always say to people, you know, I'm unemployable. I've always been unemployable, and there was nothing else. I mean, unless I'd gone into practice 40 years ago, 35 years ago, God knows what would have happened, because, you know, I knew sort of the journey I wanted to be on, but I really didn't know how I was going to get there, and it's taken a long time. And I suppose, you know, when you get the confidence, certainly as an architect, comes when you're able to, you know, you're able to offer, you're being able to, well, number one is you're able to think kind of quickly and get to, you know, ideas, not just finding solutions, but get to ideas rather quickly, and that they begin to have real meaning, and that's very hard. It must be exactly the same for musicians. When you think you've cracked it, I mean, or a painter, when you think you've got, that's it. Getting to that's it point must be enormously difficult for a musician, like a painter was saying. I was reading the Monet review for the Courtauld, saying that, you know, he had 109 paintings of London, and he would take them back to Paris, and he looked at them, and they were really never finished, because he was never really happy with the outset. And we're probably, as creative people, maybe a lot of us are in the same position. We're not sure if we will ever get to that point where we would like to get to, and that keeps the journey, the creative journey, going, I think.
I just think
But the confidence is very important.
Well, and also your confidence in the locality, because you've been involved in these initiatives in Dunoon. And I just wonder, what kind of metric of confidence do you see there?
Well, what's interesting is we have no status whatsoever from Dunoon. The very fact, when we got to Dunoon, the very fact I'd been born there, brought up there, I was still an outsider. I was living in London, so I had no status of any. Not that I was seeking status, but it was a tough gig in Dunoon to persuade the locals that we were there to do the best for the place, not for ourselves. And
so there was an assumption you were in this for instrumental reasons.
Well,
or a suspicion.
There was suspicion, and I never like to say about we put personally, my wife and I, quite a lot of money in the project, just for circumstances allowed us to do it. We sold our house, we made a bit of profit on a business, but nobody knew that we were the providers. I would say, well, we've gone off and we've found a sponsor to do this, a sponsor to do that, a sponsor to do the film festival. Nobody knew that we were funding it, because
Can I just...
it would have been a very unhealthy place for us to be in, that we were sort of the providers. But it allowed us, just like it allowed us to go to your heritage lottery competition, for me to go to the heritage lottery chair and say, tell me what we need to put into this project for you to give us the matching funds, which will deliver because we had to get 25% matching funds. And when they said, I said, well, we will commit this. Will this unlock the funding we need? And she said, well, I shouldn't really be telling you that, but I said, well, will it unlock it? She said, the answer that she gave, the confidence, and it was a very kind of entrepreneurial moment. I thought, fucking hell, fucking hell. I mean, we could actually do this. But it does mean I had to go back to my wife and say, listen, we're going to have to do this. And she said, brilliant. And you know, it was like winning the lottery. Suddenly, everything, bum. So that was the money bit. that had to be at some point, it would never have happened, actually. And then that got all sorts of local people, all sorts of people came forward with funding. It's a bit like the invitations you were saying for your event, that suddenly people began to pour in, began to support it. So it created this sort of, and that was a
Dynamic.
Can I just make up? I think we're in a wee bit of danger of forgetting the other half of the equation here in terms of confidence. And that's the audiences, the readership, the people who consume what creative people make. They have to feel confident too.
for sure.
They have to feel confident that they can turn up to an event and it's for them. And I think that's really, really important. We can all do our damnedest to create music, to write novels, to write books, to put on events, but if nobody turns up, they don't work. And in order for that to work, we've got to say to the audience, this is not some sort of pointy-headed, extravaganza for a tiny number. This is for you all of you. You can look at the program in James's festival, in mine, or James's, and they can say, well, okay, I'll have a go at that, I'll do that. And my rationale of inviting really well-known people was that, yes, we'd always fill that marquee, but somebody would try something else. They'd not just come for one thing, they'd go and see something else. And we've watched that, we can track it with our audience because it's all online now. We see their consumption of events and their tastes expanding. And that's to do with confidence on the other side of the equation.
Well, let's bring in Gillian on precisely that point, because the music you were creating with these young people, I mean, it's not immediately accessible. It's not, it's not part of the folk tradition. It's not popular music. It's not rock or blues or anything like that. It's modern classical music, dissonance. It's not atonal, but I mean, it's quite demanding to listen. I mean, it requires concentration to listen to it. What kind of response did you get from the people, and were people willing to come and listen to it?
In terms of the audience?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the audience for these kinds of concerts are the local community and friends and families of the students, and I think there's a great appetite for people to see what young people in Cumnock are capable of in terms of their creative endeavours with the Trist. I mean, going back to the self-confidence thing is something that we come up against when we go into the schools. As part of the music curriculum in schools, I mean, to go back a wee bit, the composition component was removed from the SQA, the Scottish Qualifications Authority, and it's just recently been brought back in. So we're now going into schools like Robert Burns Academy and St Joseph's and other East Ayrshire areas, and they don't have the experience of composing.
Let's just pin that down. You're saying that they no longer teach composition in schools?
They didn't used to for 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
That's just because of COVID or because of a lack of interest by the SQA?
COVID. Yeah, COVID.
Well, I gather that there is, this problem of lack of ambition, it is very apparent in the school curriculum for music now, because as I understand it, music is not really taught now to the kind of level that would be required, in state schools we're talking about, that would be required for them to be able to get into the Royal Conservatoire, grade 7 or grade 8. They only teach to grade 4 or 5, is that right? And in fact, you're getting teachers now coming out of this process who can't play their instruments and therefore can't do composition, is that correct?
It's a very complex situation where teachers are going to university and maybe not getting the experiences of composing there, and then with the coming back into the curriculum when they go into schools, they're expected to juggle instrumental studies, musical literacy and composition unit. So there's a kind of lack of teacher confidence when they go in and they try to deal with a highly complex creative scenario, because composition is it's a hugely challenging thing to do, but a hugely rewarding thing to do for young people. But you'll find that there's a lot of feelings of anxiety, and a lot of teachers and pupils are scared of coming to grips with composition due to the nature of there's no right or wrong. It's a completely fluid thing that you can do whatever you like, especially in a school system where you're really taught from the get-go that there is right and wrongs in the school. if you go to a certain subject, you're taught facts and figures which are necessary for that subject, but in music, it's something that is much more fluid and creative, and you're the ultimate autonomy to make things, and that's powerful for young people, especially in this area, because it gives them the self-confidence that they need to go forward in life.
I'd like to pick up on this point about confidence in the audience. I think it's very important that we forget that our jobs as cultural leaders or educators isn't just to find the young people and give them the nourishment they need. That is absolutely crucial, especially in the context of what we're talking about here today. But there is this, I think, equally important responsibility for leaders to focus on training the taste, if you like, and the capacity of audiences to not just want reassurance, but accept innovation. The relationship between reassurance and innovation in the arts is very, very crucial, and it isn't spoken about enough. You can reassure people all the time. You can look at the bestseller list, see the top 10 selling books, put them in a tent at a book festival and call it a festival, and everybody will come and they'll get what they thought they were going to get and what they already knew they liked. That's fine. That's a success of a sort. But it's not a great festival. A great festival is when you, by a process of education and second guessing and encouragement and marketing, body forth the idea to your potential audience that there's something innovative that they don't know they want, that they don't know they can handle, that they might even think they don't like. And that is the job of cultural creators.
Exactly what they're doing here.
Oh, so that's why the trust is so interesting. It's not just studied with stars. There are stars here. It's fascinating. But there's also, as you said in your question a second ago, there's difficulty, and there has to be difficulty. There's the esoteric, there's the avant-garde, and then there's jazz. I think that's the hallmark of a brilliant cultural project. That we're not bullied by reassurance, giving people what they already want and know they want.
James, you wanted to come in?
Yes, well, I think on 2 points. First of all, I so agree, and one of the challenges of impoverished book festivals is that you do keep your very nuanced talks, which perhaps only attract, in our case, 30 people. And that will cost as much to put on as, getting some.
That's a risk every time.
And it's completely wonderful, though, but they are the best talks. And you learn so much, and they are rather frightening to go to. And yet, on the other hand, you come out being wowed by it. And then you hear, usually within 5 months, they're all on Woman's Hour or Daily. So, you will have heard it first at Borders. But the other thing is to go back to getting an audience from the very earliest age. The best example, certainly at Boswell, is the Schools Day, when 450 school children come, and you see them pouring off the buses and racing towards Dumfries house.
Really?
And they all go round the house with this marvellous actor called Danny Boyle, who is James Boswell. And he's very naughty and he's very funny and full of double entendres. And then they get these tours with all the guides. So they see the Chippendale, they see the Adam, they see this, they see that. And I love watching them come out of that house, and they're not like all the normal, boring people who go around and say we're all too interesting. They are screaming with delight, and Danny is still there, sort of joshing around. And you feel that a lot of them will now feel going across a threshold like Dumfries House is actually thrilling. But I think the other way, and just moving on to the visual arts, and I think it's so brilliant about never lowering your standards with your Macmillan's, with your projects, because I think the danger with the visual arts is standards can be lowered. And I think when you are again looking at getting people to engage with the visual arts at a high standard, you should be looking at radical things. And I think Banksy is a very good example, and Gormley is a very good example, because these are artists who really are operating out there. They're almost like landscape artists, or wallscape artists. So they are engaging the passerby with high art of their particular genre. And I think that's what we should be doing in Cumnock and Auchinleck. We should be doing great murals. There was a fantastic mural of John Burns' portrait of the Big Iain on a gable end in Glasgow. It wasn't painted by John, but he did the cartoon and blown up. I mean, that you need to be going at a high level. It's no good just having a sort of random portrait, let's face it, of Robert Burns based on the gable end. That's just not going to do it. You need good artists to do it. And that's, again, the way you get, and then actually you need to be borderless. There are so many borders. There are 3 borders in Ayrshire. There's a huge, great border between Ayrshire and Dumfriesshire. And actually, if you think 20 minutes down the road at Sanker, you've got Jenks's last great masterpiece, land art, at Croich Multiverse. And with Boswell, we then do tours, particularly for the authors. So they go to Croich, and then they will go to Pierre Hardy's study, or whatever it is, or Dean Castle. And there should be no borders, because there's these psychological barriers that we can't go into Sanker, you know, though we are 20 minutes away, and see Croich Multiverse. And that's another thing about breaking down borders, whether it's going into Dumfries House or whatever.
Absolutely.
There are quite good reasons to not want to go into Sanker.
Not now.
Just a joke.
Well, I think at this point, I have to bring in the ghost of this particular feast, which is the state, which is the Creative Scotland, state subsidies, and there are going to be a lot fewer of them in future. Alistair, what are your thoughts about that? What sort of role does the state play in all this?
I think a diminishing role, frankly, and you know, we've heard about cuts from the Scottish Government recently, and I think there'll be even more severe cuts next year. And if it's between, you know, an A&E department in a hospital and a book festival, we all know the answer to that. And so I think Creative Scotland's going to get really choked. Local authorities are important for our festivals, and they, with the freeze and the community charge, the rates as I used to know them, again, we're going to see real problems there. And what we're driven to are 2 other areas, well, 3 really. One of them is we could always hike our prices. You know, I could charge 30 quid for some things, but we won't do that, because the minute you do that, you exclude all sorts of people.
Yeah.
The other thing that you can do is go to sponsorship with commercial companies, but because the economy, you know, you just need to read the headlines, the economy is not great. That's very hard. And what we're now relying on is high net worth individuals, philanthropy, old-fashioned philanthropy, which is one of the things that's sponsoring this session, which is great. But I think I'm not quite yet. But I mean, I think what we've got is a very difficult situation, because also book festivals have been absolutely whacked in the side of the head by writers themselves,
Activists as well.
activists and so on. And you know, Baillie Gifford, who were terrific sponsors, £1 million into the book festival economy, gone.
And they're one of the best. I mean, they're regarded as one of the best sponsors,
Absolutely.
because they didn't get involved, they didn't try to interfere, they didn't plaster it with their logos, and they allowed you to get on with it, but they were targeted. Why was that?
It was basically because it was an easy, cheap headline for people. There were people, frankly, who signed a letter who should have bloody well known better. And you know, I saw, I mean, the threats that we were getting were quite, I mean, the police said to me, I said this year earlier, you know, if activists turn up at your festival, don't shake hands with somebody you don't know. I said, what? Because they'll have super glue on their hands and you're stuck. You know, I mean, crazy stuff like that. And so we found ourselves in the front line, but next year, goodbye £1 million. And we've got to fill that hole. Because what we do...
You got $1 million from...
Baillie Gifford, for all the festivals that are sponsored by Baillie Gifford, there are 12, I think, in Britain. And so we've all got a vast hole to fill next year. But the reason that we all do it isn't because we have this terrific economic impact, blah, blah, blah. The reason we do it is to involve communities. It's to involve people. It's to get the kids, the wee ones, along. It's to get the people you would never think would ever go to a festival to turn up and listen to Andrew O'Hagan or whoever it is. You know, I mean, well, we get better people than that, but you know. Obviously.
But you can't get anybody else to do it.
No, I know. I'll give up.
I'm cheap.
I'm dead cheap. But I think what we find ourselves in is a turning point. You know, I've spoken to other festivals and do this all the time, and 2 or 3 are thinking, actually, we'll do a 2-tier thing. You know, we'll have the blue chip 5-star 30 quid a ticket festival, and then we'll do stuff, if we can, for other folks, for kids and for your community.
I'll bring
Terrible.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. Number one is, I go back to my thing about money following a good idea, is that, you know, sustainable culture has to work, can work without money, and I think that's the first thing. I mean, you can, you know, art can be created anywhere, so it doesn't need, you know, the financial bit can't be seen as the, you know, I think for the crutch to create art, number one. Number two is when there is, and we talk about, I don't know the detail of Creative Scotland, but when there's so much benefit that culture can bring to a local community, like the Dunbar Hall, and for instance during COVID it became the community heart, but yet, you know, Argyll Bute haven't put a penny into the Borough Hall or supported it in any way, shape or form. Well, there must be some metric, there must be some calculation that you need to be able to make about benefits of culture, whether it's Boswell or Cumnock or Dunoon, whatever it is, and and some sort of benefit in kind that needs to find its way back into festivals or projects like Dunbar Hall, and nobody's really cracked that.
James, what are your thoughts about Creative Scotland? What kind of interaction do you have with the
Well,
public body?
I'm fortunate that the Fleming Collection is funded by this private art foundation. Although I do still, I mean, when I spent most of my career in the arts or in the cultural sector, and in my 20s, very early on, I realized I had to go to a business school. So I sent myself off to get an MBA in France because I realized I had to understand about cash flow. And that has saved my career. That's meant I've been able to sustain a career in the arts. And it's nearly everything I've been in, I've always usually arrived and there's a cash crisis. But I think it is, I think it's very, very challenging now, actually. So I think the visual arts, there's quite a strong, the good thing about the visual arts is there is a strong commercial sector, which is larger than the government sector. Creative Scotland is, well, I mean, you know, they're trimming their grants all down the line. I mean, Boswell is suffering from that. So it's difficult, but I think in the visual arts you have a bigger, and I think in literature you do too. You've got a thriving private sector, but where you're on big ticket items like orchestras and what is done here, it's harder. But I would never go out and expect really to get much from Creative Scotland, and I think that they're always at risk of being too institutionalised and not and not wanting to. They sort of want to scare the horses, usually with avant-garde artists who are no longer avant-garde. It's all a bit late and the artists are very expensive. So it doesn't really work.
Well, that's a good moment to bring this discussion out into the floor. But first, I just want to make sure, Thursa, do you want to add anything to what you've been hearing here just before we throw it open to the audience?
Well, yes, I mean, we're in the middle of this, awaiting the decision that Creative Scotland should have been making, which was due to be announced at the end of October. I mean, we've always had the situation where the money that we get as our core funding is renewed and it's subject to settlement of the Scottish government budget. So
to go through?
it was a process, yes, a lot of work involved. I mean, I know people who did, you know, a month of overtime during that. Some organisations had to bring in fundraisers to help them write the applications because they had such limited resources. And it's had a very bad effect on the morale of the whole art sector, the process.
I mean, is it just a kind of tick box exercise? Is that what you're saying? Very bureaucratic? Or?
It was a lengthy process, and yeah, it did require an awful lot.
It is.
You know, and that's even
60-page application form.
Yeah.
It's terrible, isn't it?
And highly competitive.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the other thing.
It's Orwellian, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the application.
Give us an example of that. You know.
Well, the applications are 60 pages long to discourage people.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the
yeah,
point.
yeah.
You know, but the whole process. I mean, we have to employ someone who does nothing but fill in forms. That's all they do. That's all they do. They're very good at it, but and it has a special language as well.
Must dictate about it.
We're paying one commission.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got microphones, roving microphones on both sides of the hall. And I invite you to put your hands up and indicate if you want when you want to come in, preferably with not a rude gesture. But I first want to have a word from Sir James himself, because he knows more than anyone about the secret sauce that makes the Cumnock Trice work, and how it's evolved over the last 10 years. And remember, this year it won the Sky Arts Prize, which is quite a notable achievement.
Well, when I launched the Cumnock Trice 10 years ago, first of all, there were some people who told me I was mad and it would never work, and I've been delighted to prove all those doubters wrong over the last 10 years. But I've had a massively quick and steep learning curve. I never used to think about money, talk about money at all 10 years ago. Now I think about it all the time. And I'm not ashamed about that. And I was just thinking about this. I was talking to Andrew earlier about the importance of fundraisers and fundraising. And we should be unembarrassed about this. I mean, some of the great composers in the past were obsessed with money, right from Beethoven to Stravinsky. Because it was their livelihoods, and they would continually send off angry letters to the publishers and their commissioners demanding money. And if they hadn't done that, nobody else would have done it for them. So in a sense, running the Cumnock Trice, we have to advocate for culture and the arts in Cumnock, in Ayrshire. If we don't do it, no one else will do it. So we are unembarrassed about seeking funds, and you have to grow a hard skin, a brass neck, and just go for it. So it is a very, very important thing. I'm fascinated by your discussion about Creative Scotland and alternative funds, and who knows what's around the corner. It's a dicey time. I wouldn't like to think this was the last Cumnock Trice. I want it to go for another at least 10 years and beyond, and deep in my heart I know that will be true.
The question that's been discussed here about raising confidence, not just in the community, but in the audience, of arousing expectations of the audience, not just of the performers and their composers. And you must have come head on with that when you came down here with this crazy idea of going to schools and getting young people composing, string quartets practically from scratch.
That's right. I always remember growing up in Cumnock that it was a very musical place. Lots of people from quite humble backgrounds like my own loved music. My grandfather was a coal miner, like many of the men in this area, but he was also a euphonium player. People like him and the people that I knew through him loved music. They sang in their local church choirs, they sang in the Gilbert and Sullivan societies and so on. And in a sense, some of that died, but the embers were still there, and it's been a process of blowing life, blowing fire back into those embers. They're still alive, and they've become something, I think, very beautiful in this part of the world in the last little while.
Just fine. What about you? What are your thoughts about the question of the standards and keeping standards, and whether standards will be maintained in the educational sector, and particularly in teaching of music?
Yes, you asked some difficult questions. It's a big challenge, and not just in music, but there's a continual debate, not just in Scotland, about the lowering of standards and the dumbing down in culture generally. It's not just that youngsters are getting less chance to encounter the great composers. It's I think Andrew and others on the panel will say that even reading is under threat. That has to be maintained. There have to be activists on the ground fighting our cause, and that means going into schools and other parts of the community with our hearts ablaze for what we love about what we do.
Why is that happening in Scotland, of all places, with this great educational tradition, which goes back to the Reformation, when the Presbyterian Church started teaching kids to read so they could read the Bible? I mean, Scottish education used to be regarded, or it was certainly south of the border, it was regarded as a very, very, the highest possible standard. Now, what's happened to that? Is it the culture? Is it curriculum for excellence? Has it helped or hindered?
It's all above my pay grade, these questions, but I think it's not that I don't think about these. I think about them all the time. But if we allowed these situations and these anxieties to overpower us, we'd be beaten into submission. We've got to fight back and fight from a position of a deep love for the music and the culture that we require, and that is the activism that works, and it will persuade people. It will persuade people in government. I'm interested in this story that James tells about the Grace and the Good in Edinburgh not being interested in saving Dumfries House, and yet everything's changed, maybe not in an instant, but gradually, when certain things happened. We want the Cumnock Trust to be those certain things.
Oh. Okay, gentlemen, want to hand up at the back, please. And ideally, if you could say who you are, and you can be anonymous if you like, but say who you are, this helps, and preferably direct your point to one of the panel.
I'm Alec Douglas. I live in Cumnock and have done all my life. We see in Dumfries and Gallery that I've got a very successful book town, a very successful artist town. North Ayrshire's got a nice craft town that is remote. Does the panel and probably John Andrews directing to agree that the time would be right for Cumnock to leave the negative side of the branding of the ex-mining town and change it to Cumnock, the music town, obviously with the Cumnock Prize as its heart.
I mean, Cumnock is defined by its past as well as its, but it mustn't be inhibited by it. So I think absolutely hold on to it because it defines the place and it defines the people and the attitudes and in a way the instincts of the people. I mean, the fact that James refers to his background and his family's background in mining shows how important, how fundamental that is to his psyche, and I'm sure that applies to all of us. But you know, so I think the one needs to be very clear about not losing the identity, the original identity, because it can be both. It can be many things, can't it? I mean, it can be lots of things to everybody. And that's always been my view. There is no, it's been, when we're talking about audience and about you know, I think you can be anything to everybody. So I think we should be proud of what Cumnock was and what Cumnock can be in the future and aspire towards that. I really do, because it's, I don't think one, I mean, if one tries to, and I know you're not necessarily saying eliminate the past, then what is it?
Alistair.
I was in Wigtown. You mentioned the book town on Tuesday and Wednesday this week, and it's absolutely remarkable the transformation that's taken place, because you're absolutely right, the branding is everywhere, you know, the brown signs off the A75 and all the rest of it, directing people. And yet I turned up on Tuesday and it was dreich as get out. God, it was awful. And I was on at 6 o'clock blethering about the Highlands, and I thought it'll be 3 men and a duck. It'll be awful. And I got to the county buildings, the old county buildings, and there were 3 men and a duck, with about 20 minutes to go. And suddenly, people came from nowhere, and the place was rammed, absolutely rammed. And I was asking folks afterwards where they'd come from. Miles, they come from miles in Galloway. You know, people from Dumfries to come to the festival. It becomes a magnet. Because the other thing that gets lodged in their brain, in ITV we used to call it an appointment to view. You knew when Coronation Street was on and you were there. Well, they know when the festival was on in Wigtown and they're there. And so if you lodge that kind of identity, and I'm not suggesting you forget about Keir Hardy or about mining or whatever, but if you lodge that identity and you tie it to the dates of this lovely festival at the same time, it will expand enormously, because you are near big cities where they're not. In Galloway, Wigtown's not near any big central population, but people can get here from Glasgow and get here from Edinburgh really easily. And I think you should absolutely go for that.
I think that's the point. You don't want to shortchange yourself. Sorry, you can have both. This can be a famous and proud ex-mining community, which is now the community of music.
Yeah.
That is memory at work. You know, there's the miner who also played the euphonium. It was always like that. It's only half a generation ago that the mining tradition sadly came to a halt here, or began to. And I think that we need to keep in touch with our essential self when it comes to this. To somehow cancel the past and say we've got a new brand is to sort of, I think, close down a part of the self, and part of the community self. You can have both. The richness of the place is that you have both, utterly in the present, but with memory, and with photographs, and with a sense of having been somewhere.
But it is in the cultural institutions and publishers, and often have a kind of patronising, cliched expectation about, and you must have come across this yourself when your books are being commissioned, because publishers want a sort of simple story, they want, rough, working class miners, getting drunk, beating their children, all this kind of stuff. I mean, there is, and also with culture and history, there is a sort of expectation from the metropolitan point of view that
the war is always against cliche. For every writer worth their salt, for every musician, who's dealing with innovation, who's trying to break open new ground, trying to unearth new truths, then you're fighting against cliche all the time. And of course, I'm not just talking about Cumnock or Ayrshire. Scotland has to deal with the pressure of cliche all the time. That we're all drunk, or we're all this, or we're all, we're politically that, or women are that. You're constantly trying to evolve against the cliche and against being over-defined by outsiders who don't really know what they're talking about. Exactly. And I think that's part of your creativity, is coming up with novel, new ways to resist the cliche and show humanity, local humanity, afresh.
And Gillian, you've been really at the coal face of this, almost literally, because this is a coal mining area. A lot of these photographs that, I wish we could show them actually, because you'd be astonished to see these works, juxtaposed with abstract expressionists, Jackson Pollocks, and others like that. And the way that these young people described the connections, and also brought in their experience, even though those are very modernist images, they brought in their own experience and somehow they merged, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, like I said, the special thing about that project is the personal and historical and cultural connection to art, and what Simon did was reflect back to themselves an important part about their culture through his artwork. I think that's something that's incredibly valuable, and go back to self-esteem and acknowledging where we come from and what that means to us, and what that means as us as creators, and for students as creators to reflect that back into original compositions is what will generate Cumnock as a place for new music making.
Okay. Sorry.
Can I quickly say something about mining? A book's just come out on another book on the miners' strike, and we went to an event the other day about it. And what is absolutely typical, the strike in Scotland, is that actually it's all about Fife and Midlothian. And someone asked, have you interviewed any Ayrshire miners? I said, no, I didn't interview anyone from Ayrshire for this book. And there was a man in the audience from Dalmellington. He said, well, it's very nuanced, the strike, because I was down the mine in Dalmellington, and we were more moderate than other, And you just thought that is absolutely typical, that even, with the mining history, it's bypassed. And it's all too easy to go off to Midlothian and Fife, where also the great political clout is too, and the stories are. But actually, there are so many stories here, so in a way, it's very important they're not forgotten and that they are recorded. The open casting is wonderful, because of course that's the next stage after the mines were closed. So.
Thursa, sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the process you talk about with Simon, and also with yourself, and with what James does with young people. And it's this idea of the teaching artist, the artist who comes and works with people and kind of draws out and elicits ideas from people, and just as you described with the students involved in that project. And I am pretty sure that in Cumnock itself there are a lot of people with creativity, right in their souls, people who are doing all sorts of creative activities as part of their regular lives, whether it's whatever they're involved with, crafts or music making or writing, creative writing. I know there's a wonderful organisation called Camps, which a lot of people are involved with. And you know, it is there. It's flourishing in Cumnock in all sorts of different ways. And I think just connecting that to this idea of audiences, I think participation in the arts and sort of being actively involved in it is incredibly important. As you know, that gives you that sense of, you know, that being part of your identity and what you do. And then the link and connection is made with other people who are doing those same kinds of things. And then, you know, this kind of fear of crossing over the threshold into some kind of artistic event that you maybe feel is not for me because, you know, that's not my family background, or, you know, my friends and, you know, my social group that, you know, is kind of separate from that. But you do need to kind of open up those ways for people to cross over into something unknown and slightly different and a bit challenging. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there are quite often moments that really spark that. I got into the festival thing in 1971 when I was still at university, and I did a festival in Kelso, my hometown. My dad was horrified. The likes of us was the phrase. Not for the likes of us. And I heard this band playing on the radio. I thought, oh, they're really good. And I got in touch with their agent, booked them. They had a big hit. But they still came after they had the big hit. I remember we charged 75p a ticket, and it was Genesis. And we played in the Tate Hall in Kelso, and they let off indoor fireworks. Mrs. Nicol, the hall keeper, said, "Wait till your dad hears about it."
So, who's next? Can I get an indication of how many people would like to get in? Yes? Okay, so here, and Truce.
Yes.
Next.
This is my first visit to Cumnock. I arrived in town about 5 minutes before this session started. First view, and obviously it's obvious why I've come here from New Jersey, where I live now, despite my accent. I'm very interested to understand how an event such as this can lead to cultural regeneration and in turn social regeneration, which we've heard mention of. So I have two parts to my question. The first is, could you just fill out, if possible, a little bit of detail about how the saving of Dumfries House, what are the causal links there between where we are now? How did that lead to this? In what way did it inspire it? And then the second part is, and this might be a question that I'll ask somebody who lives here after the session, in what way this is leading with cultural regeneration? What impact does it have beyond that when we all go home? Are there signs, are there things that have happened in the town that are good?
Well, the big statistic for Dumfries House is it employs 250 people, whereas under the Dowager Marchioness of Beauty, probably employed 5. And that again, so that's been a huge engine, an economic engine, and they make a point of recruiting in East Ayrshire and locally. And also a big part of it is training, and also all these schools. So they've got a fantastic chef training school, where literally, I mean, the stories are legion of 15, 16-year-olds coming out of Kilmarnock or wherever it is and going through this process. And half of them end up in Buckingham Palace or with wherever as butlers or cooks or whatever it is. So there's a big economic driver. It's the biggest employer in East Ayrshire after the local council, which says something about the local council. So I think that's, and also it's a huge attraction now. I mean, you know, when you say I live in Ayrshire, funnily enough, we did a press conference in London at the start of the campaign to say it to all the cynical press. And it was at this charity called the Art Fund. And so one of the PR people came up and said, "Oh, where exactly is Dumfries House?" So I said, well, you know, you go up the motorway, you turn left at Douglas. And, oh, I don't think I'm going to turn left at Douglas because we go to the Highlands. And you know, what it's done is it's made everyone turn left at Douglas. So it's got, you get hundreds of people now come, and then you have overspill at Auchinleck House, which is a landmark trust property, so that's always booked out. And then people go to Arran. And so it has been this huge, as big as having a whacking grey factory, or let's face it, a coal mine. You know, it's got that same economic, it's a powerhouse now, and yet it's still a place of enormous beauty, grace, wit, fun, you know, with the magic touch of the king. I mean, it's a miracle, really. And that's why it's been such a vital force for regeneration, and he was right to realise that.
Great. Now, time is getting on. Sorry to interrupt. Time is getting on, so I know there's a number of people who want to get in. So let's have another question here, please. No, I'm sorry. You'll be next.
My name is Jeff, I'm from New Cumnock, the original Cumnock, by the way.
Why is it called New Cumnock then?
Yeah. Oh, don't start that conversation. Right, back in the 1100s, right, then anyway, we had the castle at Cumnock. Right, well, it was New Cumnock. Right, my name is Jeff. I've worked at Dumfries house, I've worked at all the heirs in Sandkirk, and I've worked with East Ayrshire, so I've been everywhere. Right, I think there used to be a thing called Pride of the Place, and I think we should bring it back to this area. And the Trust, I've got the Trust, not the Christ. The Trust has done that a lot. There's a lot of pride in Cumnock, especially this week. Dumfries house has brought a lot of pride to Ayrshire. But coming in to Ayrshire, we should brag about it a wee bit more. We should tell people what's in Ayrshire. Because of the Crown, Prince Charles at the time, we've got an open air swimming pool down in Cumnock. There's only 4 open air pools. A heated swimming pool, of course. But I was acquitted that as well before you got it over. I was like 2013 in Scotland. It's went for 10 years now, 11 years coming. So that's brilliant. He saved that. He saved the town hall in New Cumnock. There's talk, and I've asked for ages, for a mining museum. You mentioned a mining museum before. In New Cumnock, not at Dumfries house, but in New Cumnock. New Cumnock was where my shank disaster happened 75 years ago, come September the 7th next year. The greatest ever mining rescue, 113 men rescued. Now, I think there should be a mining museum there in New Cumnock. And there should be things to tell folk with a mining museum. And having a mining museum, have it as a tourist information bit as well. So you can get in there and it tells you everything in Ayrshire.
And we could get John.
Get John?
Behind this.
Well, I think it's in the... Well, talking about it again, actually. Sorry.
Well, that's great. I'm going to take that as an observation, so I want to get other people in. There's lots of people waiting very patiently. So who was next? I can't actually remember now. This gentleman.
Hello, Alan James, Governor Arts Festival. We're a young festival started up 3 years ago, and we made 2 decisions, which was to make all the tickets £5 to make them accessible. And the other thing we do get a lot of local people, but mix it with artists and musicians, authors from far and wide, to let government people enjoy it and afford it. My question to the panel is, how do you get footfall and how do you get publicity? Because we've tried contacting radio, press. Because we're a very young, small festival, we struggle with that aspect. We do social media, but that's not the only answer. So it's really the people that are running the festivals.
Well, Alistair, you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, what we find is that it's cumulative. I mean, you said you just started. And there are 2 things that we do which are for the future in that regard. First of all, when people buy tickets, they buy them all online. That's normal nowadays. But you harvest their email addresses. This is absolutely crucial. There are 2 or 3 agencies in Scotland who are very, very good at this, and we use one of them, based in Galashiels, in fact. So building your database is absolutely critical. And it's worth doing almost anything to get people's email addresses out of them. We run competitions, we do all sorts of things. We get giveaways from local companies, and we do it throughout the year. And our database is very large now, and it's our principal marketing tool. We don't really care very much about press and radio, to be honest. I mean, it's lovely if they cover us and so on, but using Facebook, using all the socials in terms of putting out stories and all the rest of it, it's not how any of us started in press and television and so on, but it's definitely the way it works now. And the other thing that's really worth doing, if you can, is to get sponsors to help you with advertising. One of the things that we do when we get a new sponsor, particularly if it's a big company, we ask them about their own reach. You know, how big a database have you got, for example? Not just your staff, but your clients and so on. And we find that helps really, really a great deal. It also, frankly, helps if you can persuade 2 or 3 really, really big names to come. I'm afraid it's show business. You know.
Douglas Maxwell, who's the playwright, he's our patron, so that does help to a certain degree.
Exactly.
He comes every year and does something.
Yeah.
It's a draw.
But get Alan Cumming and Forbes Masson to come, you know, and so on. I mean, because they were at Wigtown. I mean, you can do it, and also you have to really use blackmail.
But they're often very keen to come, aren't they? I mean,
Well,
it's surprising how willing people are actually to come, and particularly for local.
But if it's rural, though, yeah, if it's rural, it's harder. Because if people come to Melrose, it's 2 days out of their lives. If they go to Henley-on-Thames to the festival there, it's 3 hours out of their lives. And so that's a big, big thing, because well-known people are busy people. But I think all of those things that I was talking about earlier, about you know, harvesting database and so on, and other people's, they really, really work. And if we ever think that something needs a bump, that's all we do, is just straight out to our 18,000. And also, one of the things that I find really works well too, is if you can get whoever it is who's reasonably well known to do stuff, not necessarily for the BBC, God bless them, but actually for local radio. Local radio is so important now, so important.
Well, try Iain Rankin, he's very keen to come.
I just want to say one more thing quickly. 2, you have to give it time. It's not going to start necessarily. Secondly, our lesson in Dunoon, as we said, you know, Cannes, Berlin, Venice, you know, Dunoon. And we took it out in the local paper, we designed it like the old wrestling posters they had at the Queen's Hall in Dunoon, and we realised it's 10,000 people by the Dunoon and Agartha standard. It created an immediate audience. So give it time and do something ridiculous to sell the first one.
Okay.
It sets an ambition.
And who's next? Who's still wanting to ask a question?
Hi, my name is Sue Baxendale. I'm a professional orchestral musician and teacher and community project manager for music projects. And my question is one of outreach. So we've talked a lot about how Creative Scotland funds outreach and how all the arts organisations are squabbling, trying to get hold of this money in order to put projects on, to pay for their main scale, to pay for their outreach. But what I see happening here and happening with Drake Music and Government Festival is I see community work. This is reaching into a community. It's reaching into the people who are finding fulfillment, finding self-expression, building confidence, finding their sense of identity and purpose. When so much of our money is wasted on projects that are deemed outreach, but the funding pot moves on. So
what kind of things do you have in mind?
Projects that schools need to buy in order to serve their basic requirement for curriculum for excellence. For instance, you can purchase a product from a national company that will basically service your entire creative output for that term or that year.
I see, right. Whereas
money could be spent creating a sense of purpose, a sense of identity for a community. So my question to the panel is, how does Scotland, how does a nation fund across the country projects such as the Trist that develop a community, that live, that serve that community, that stay with the community long term, not just pop in and out for a project?
Thursa?
Yes, how can you kind of take a model like this and replicate it, and or not replicate it exactly, because all places are different, but I think, you know, as an organisation, we have done these partnership projects with a couple of festivals in Scotland, and for us, it's very important that disabled composers and musicians and ensembles have greater visibility. They have to have the option of having their work performed, having it programmed in a variety of different contexts. So we certainly are looking for new partners, different partners in different places, and extending this possibility of kind of platforming the work to a much wider range of places, which could include book festivals, I have to say. And for us, that brings us to a wider audience as well. And the sort of bit that you give back, you're talking about kind of reaching into the community. I mean, from our point of view, we have, this kind of long expertise that is ever evolving, that we've evolved over, and we can bring that to the local audience, to young disabled people, whether they're in school, out of school, and other parts of the community as well, and engage them in similar ways, and hopefully kind of alight a keen interest and a kind of desire to learn more. So yeah, I mean, we have kind of international connections and are doing that now, and kind of seeing reflected back people taking this model and adapting it for other communities.
Good. We've time for one more question before I ask the panel to make some summing up. Yeah.
How can we continue to sorry, I'm Nancy, I'm a retired GP, and I'm concerned about the mental health of young people, not just disabled, but the general population. How can we encourage youngsters to develop normal mental health if we're having such a struggle getting them off of their computer and their gadgets, off their phones? I was gratified to hear that some schools are stopping their children bringing in phones until after they're 14.
Well, of course, Gillian, you actually got them onto their computers, didn't you?
It's away from
digital mutation, but they're away from TikTok, presumably. What do you say to that?
I would say that's a very complicated situation. It was in regards to young people and technology. I mean, in regards to the projects that we've been working on, especially for the likes of Great Music Scotland, technology is incremental for delivering accessibility to students. But what I suppose you're getting at is the overuse of technology and phones and the access to media, and which is impacting students' mental health. I think it's a fine balance, isn't it? I mean, that is a world in which young people are constantly engaging with and absorbing, and that's reflected in the way that we speak to them at a level in the schools. In terms of mental health, I mean, going in with the Tristes and delivering composition projects with them has a huge impact on their self-esteem, and I would probably say their mental health as well, because it increases their confidence and it gives them a sense of purpose when they're creating things. And even though they're looking at a computer screen for maybe 50 minutes at the time, that there's an engagement with higher level artistic thinking that is beneficial to them. So I think that in the mental health side of things, that access to more opportunities for co-creation and creative music making in terms of this discussion is only going to benefit that kind of conversation.
Yeah, a very pertinent point actually, given the figure that came out yesterday, that 1 in 10 Scots now has a mental health problem, and it rises to 1 in 15 for the under 25s, however that's defined. Anyway, we've had a genuinely fascinating discussion. I mean, I often say that without meaning it, but I genuinely mean it this time. I've learned a huge amount from hearing from these people. We've run out of time, unfortunately, but I'm going to invite them each just to make a few summary remarks or any observations or whatever they'd like to say just before we pack up. I'd like to start with Andrew.
It has been a fascinating discussion, and there's so much more to say, but I just wanted to finally, for myself, make the observation that connection between outreach respect for the community and its traditions, but also with a heart to modernise, utterly crucial. As part of the outreach programme, actually, the Edinburgh International Book Festival, I was sent this year to Dumfries prison, where I worked with some young men who never conceived of themselves as being in a position to be listened to again. Many of them, I have to say, after learning quite a lot about them, the primary crime was to be born poor. And that's often the primary crime of many young people who we find in our prisons. In a previous excursion, which turned into a sort of a long-term thing, I went again and again to Cumnock prison and dealt over a couple of years with young men there. And what I found is that they felt they'd be completely isolated away from childhood, from culture, from the inner life of the culture and the economic life of the country. And that was something to address, and I felt that culture itself, these guys, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Mayflies. It's about a bunch of young boys in Ayrshire in the 1980s and what happens to the notion of friendship when one of them was very ill 30 years later. That book connected with those men in a way that took me completely by surprise. I've had thousands of letters from young men, in Scotland especially, suffering from depression, some of them having experienced suicidal attempts. And what I found going into those prisons is that there is a heart for culture among people who you might have excluded from the fan base, the audience. They don't exist, but in this part of the world, they're very much there. I mean, past the point where I was supposed to still officially be there, I kept going back to that prison, becoming this writer not quite in residence in Kilmarnock prison. My late mother said, I knew you'd make it in the end. But I just want to make that point that there are people who aren't in this hall, who aren't in this festival this week, they've got ears, they've got hearts, they've got reading eyes, they've got abilities that we haven't yet got to. And it is part of our inspiration, I hope, that we take away from these wonderful occasions to try and reach them eventually.
John McAslan.
I'd like to just go back to the chat, but that's the first question, because I've been thinking about what you asked, and I realise I've answered it very poorly, because, excuse me, in Dunoon, on the 150th anniversary, we came forward with an idea as patrons, James and I, that it's not the question of rebranding the hall, but the focus should slightly shift to one of distinctiveness around the issue of art and science and art and the environment, which was something we feel very strongly about, of course, with rising tides and all of the ecological concerns that we all have. And there would be a degree of not casting aside what the hall had become, but rather looking to the future of challenging issues, discussing, presenting, dissecting, and engaging on issues of the day and in the future. And I think, without for a moment coming to what Cumnock, how Cumnock might wish to present itself, but the issue of thinking forward of how do you provide a distinctive voice, and I think for our part in Dunoon, that is really what we're now heading into is providing a shape for the Borough Hall, which will really look forward as far as what we can. So we're looking at exhibition project with James and I on Joseph Boys planting 7,000 oaks as part of Richard DeMarco's archive. So I think the issues that art, science and the future can collaborate to make them absolutely so relevant to the world we're in the future, that I think is one issue perhaps to think about.
Final thought, James?
I think one of the great messages that's come across again, regeneration takes time. And actually Dumfries House was saved in 2007. Arguably it didn't really take off till about 13 years later. Everything takes time, and it's easy for all of us festival people not to exaggerate, but to suggest that we've got lots and lots of people to cross the threshold and come to our festivals. We do, but that is still very, very difficult, and I think we all still have to work at that without lowering standards, getting all these people from, and particularly in a community like Auchinleck. At which point I would also say I want you all over this weekend to go to Auchinleck Kirkyard and to admire the Boswell quill, because it is not just a homage to, it's beautiful, it's not just a homage to Boswell, but it's also a celebration of the universal power of the written word. So Andrew, You know, there you are, you're part of the quill.
I'm all in.
And it's wonderful, and it's
Reserve
2 miles down the road.
Okay, Thursa?
Well, you said relevance. The relevance is very important, I think. If we're talking about a community, meeting people in a community where they are having a keen interest in them and what they have within, and making arts and culture accessible to a much wider range of people than it sometimes is. And, you know, then we'll all be enriched by that.
Final thoughts?
I'm just full of admiration for this audience of 100 people who've sat here for 2 hours listening to us, droning on. But I also want just to make the point that it's been surprising for me to listen to what my colleagues here are saying and what you've been saying. And it's the joy of live events. It's not in front of a screen, you know, it's not on the telly, it's live, and therefore it's unpredictable. And that's the joy for me of festivals. They are live and unrepeatable. They're only on at one time. If you don't go, you've missed it. That's it, tough. And I like that very much, and I've felt that spark and spirit here. It's the first time I've been to the Cumnock Tryst Christ. Sounds like playing pontoon, Tryst. But nevertheless, it's such a joy to take part in live events. And I mean, COVID was a tremendous inhibition on all of that, and we'll take decades to recover if we ever do. But nonetheless, it's an absolute joy to see everybody here, to listen to everybody's views, and to be part of the festival, a live event. It's been terrific. Thank you very much.
We have to give the final words to Gillian, who has achieved extraordinary amount in terms of raising confidence of people in their own creative ability.
Thank you. I suppose one of the biggest things that I'd like to say is just continuing conversations with local people and continuing to talk to them about their experiences, their history, their hopes and wants for, you know, the creative projects that we go in and do with them, and to talk to them about what it is that makes their local area special, and what is incremental to what they think is important to regenerate their area. And I mean, one of the projects that lives with me forever is the first Cumnock Tryst education project in Doon Academy, and we went in there, I think there was maybe 8 to 10 pupils, National 5 higher, and they really struggled just to talk to us at all. And we asked them loads of questions about, you know, right, starting from music right down to what they were doing in the day, and they weren't able to talk to us, and that was all down to self-esteem and confidence. And by the end of it, I mean, it's a famous anecdote in the Tryst is that they gave interviews to Channel 4 News at the end of the project. It's something that I probably struggled to do, you know. But that continuing having conversations with people about creativity and celebrating these achievements with young people is, I think, the most important giveaway.
Excellent. Well, we could obviously go on for very much longer. We can't. Time is against us. But don't go away, actually. I'd grab these people as they go out, and maybe you can continue the conversation then. But for the time being, for the moment, please, put your hands together for our panel.